Welcome everybody to the August 2023 indoor meeting of the Raleigh Astronomy Club. So welcome new members, existing members, etc. So actually, Juan, would you like questions as we have the meeting, or?
It's fine with me.
Yeah? Okay.
Either way.
So ignore the slide. If you have any questions, raise your hand. I will bring this microphone around to you so people on Zoom and on Facebook can hear your question. And if I forget, maybe you can repeat the question and we'll proceed. If you have questions on Zoom, please put them in chat and we'll have moments where we'll see if there's anything from Zoom to ask for the presentation. Just a quick reminder of upcoming events. We've got the Willard on the 31st, First Fridays on, fancy that, the first Friday of September. RAC on the 8th, hopefully we'll get a clear night. Imaging meeting on the 14th, our next indoor meeting on the 22nd of September. Willard on the 27th of September, so it's a different month. And then a workshop on the 30th on camera and equatorial mount with astrophotography. If you have time after and interested, we'll be going to Sammy's, or some of us will be, socialize, talk, get a meal, have some water or drink. We'll get a show of hands later. We have a sense of how many people might be joining. And now for the main event, Science Can't Wait. So tonight we have Juan Martinez. He's a senior technologist and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience leading development of modern applications. He uses open source technologies. He's done this in public, private, and nonprofit sectors, so quite accomplished. He's a dedicated amateur astrophotographer, or astrophotographer, I'll go with that word. He recently launched a company in Raleigh, OGMA. It's committed to making astronomy more accessible by lowering the cost of equipment. In tonight's talk, Juan will take us through the driving thoughts behind his work to build OGMA, his company, talking about his time as a kid in Cuba, his love of peering up at the night sky and curiosity to discover the secrets of the universe, but an inability to do so due to lack of equipment and the means in which to acquire them. So in this talk, he's going to talk about his birth of the company, OGMA, and give us some insights on the impact he hopes to have with this venture in the scientific community at large over the long term, and with us collaboratively on open source initiative that he's launching through OGMA, curate, do-it-yourself astronomy projects. Wait.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. Yes, let me share my screen so you can see the slides. There you go. So is everything okay? Good. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction, Naveen, and thank you to the club members for inviting me here and for coming here, and thank you to the ones that are joining us through Zoom. We're going to talk about a few things tonight, but before we get into the substance of the talk, I want to tell you about a story that I heard about 20-30 years ago that it really impacted me, and it made me think a lot about some of the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. The story goes like this. It was the year 200 before BC, and the great inventor and scientist from Syracuse, Aristoteles, was writing some ideas in a document. That document disappeared. It got lost. The ideas that he was writing, the document was found recently. I think, I don't remember, 20, 30 years ago, it was found. And maybe more or less, I don't remember all the details. But the ideas that he was writing in that document were, he explained a method by which he decomposed complex figures and complex shapes in smaller shapes of known areas, like square rectangles that were easier to calculate. And by aggregating then those shapes that he had decomposed, he could calculate something very close to the area or the volume of complex shape. This was very important because centuries later, we know that that was the basis of calculus. It took until many years later, like 18 centuries later, it took for Isaac Newton and Leibniz to discover and to reinvent calculus again. And Isaac Newton discovered that coincidentally, and I think it's really interesting, during another pandemic, during the plague that was happening at the time. He was at home, working from home, and he was working, and he created at the time the laws of gravity. He discovered the laws of gravity. He did a lot of extensive work in optics. He perfected what we know today as the Newtonian telescope. And in addition to all that, if that wasn't enough, he came up with calculus. By the way, I want to make a parenthesis here and let you know that these images, these illustrations are not mine. Credit should be given where it's due. If you need to create a presentation very quickly and you don't have an illustrator to create the images for you, just use AI, right? So this and the previous one, those are AI generated images, right? And it's funny because I asked to generate an image of Isaac Newton during a pandemic working from home, and yeah, AI came up with the apple and some writings that are difficult to understand. That's calculus. And also a bread. So like many of us during the pandemic, apparently AI thought that Newton was also baking his own bread. So this story that I just tell you about, I think is very interesting, and at least for me, it always make me wonder what would have been if those writings from Archimedes had not been lost for 18 centuries. What would have happened to science? Because it just happened that calculus is the basis for everything that we have today. So the electric grid, for instance, wouldn't be possible if we didn't have calculus. TV, internet, telecommunications in general, the discovery of vaccines, none of that. We couldn't do any of what we have today without calculus. And we have to wait for 18 centuries for calculus to be rediscovered, right? So think about it. Where would you be today if calculus had been discovered 18 centuries before it was discovered by Newton? So I want to tell you just while you think about that, I want to tell you a little bit about my origins and my story. I'm originally from Cuba. I was born in Cuba. How many of you, any of you have been there? I think one person over there that has been in Cuba. Anybody else? Do you know anything about Cuba? Not much?
Is Fidel Castro still in power?
No, he's not. He's not. So I was born in Cuba, and this is a photo of me actually playing baseball. In Cuba, when you're born and your parents are a little bit tired of you, they tell you, go to the street and play baseball. And so that was me there catching a ball and playing baseball. That one over there on your right side, top right side, that was the first camera that I had. And it was around that time. And I actually think that that camera was the one that took that photo. I always loved photography, always, since I was that age. And I wanted to have a camera. Later on, I had a better camera, a SLR camera. This one that is here at the bottom, always a Russian camera. In Cuba, you have things that are either, at the time, you could only have things that were either Russian or very old American stuff from before the revolution. And for instance, in between the two cameras, I wanted to have always a telescope because I wanted to look at the stars, and I couldn't put my hands on a telescope. I couldn't get one, but I was able to get a theodolite. How you call it? Theodolite?
Yeah.
Theodolite. Yes, I was able to get one, an American theodolite, old, very old, and I was amazed by that. I was able to look at the stars, the moon, see the craters, all that. It was amazing, and I discovered a star. I discovered a star, but I discovered a star for 3-4 days, something like that. I found a star, a new star. It had the shape of a fish. And I told everybody that I had discovered a star that had the shape of a fish. And I went around telling everybody. I was very proud. And until someone, I think it was one of my teachers, told me, kid, you didn't discover a star. Your telescope is pretty bad, probably. You're just looking at Saturn. You're looking at Saturn through a telescope that is probably out of collimation. And yes, if you get a telescope that is what we call nowadays a hobby killer, and you point it to Saturn, you're gonna see a fish or a fried egg or a loaf of bread, and you're gonna think that you discovered something, right? So yeah, so that was my first introduction to astronomy. Cuba produces good rum, cigars, things like that. That's another thing that Cuba produces. But another thing that Cuba produces, and a lot of them, is baseball players. Lots of baseball players. In fact, I looked up this statistic, and you can't see the details here. But in the major leagues of baseball in the United States here, you're gonna find that currently there are 82 Cuban players. This is people who was born where I was born. They found their way to the United States, and they are playing in the major leagues. However, if you look into NASCAR, you're only going to find 2 Cubans. And that tells me when you have access to something, to play with something, you can find the talent. If the masses have access to the tools, the talent will show up, right? That's the conclusion that I extracted from that. Years go by, and then at some point I was living here in the United States. I went to Denmark for 3 weeks. Year 2020, March 1st, I get to Denmark. The COVID lockdown hit. I ended up staying in Denmark for about a year. Couldn't come back. And after a year, yes, I was able to come back. But I was in the lockdown, during the lockdowns there in Denmark. And what do you do when you're in a lockdown during a pandemic and you have to stay inside your house? What do you do? Well, you do a lot of soul searching, you study, and you probably bake a lot of bread. This is bread that I actually baked while I was in Denmark. Right? So I asked AI to draw an image of a bald guy with a goatee studying astronomy. And of course, so I did a lot of studying of astronomy. This has been a passion of me for a long time, and I tried to learn everything I could. I went back to study photography again, and while I was in Denmark, I came up with the plan for what it would be my company once I was able to come back to the United States. I came back and I started, came back here to Raleigh, to my home, and I started, by the way, Naveen, you say OGMA, right? What's Naveen? Yeah. And I understand why. Pretty much most of the brands of cameras, they have weird names, and we call them by the letters, right? So ZWO, QHY, things like that. So it's OGMA. We say OGMA, right? And so I started the company here in Raleigh with a business plan that I created while I was there in Denmark. And we are currently commercializing some astronomy cameras and some accessories that we have created ourselves. We didn't build the astronomy cameras. We get it from a manufacturer. We put our brand, the accessories, some of them we build ourselves. We make them ourselves, and that's our company. I'm not going to make a pitch of our products and our stuff. Let's continue on the topic that we're discussing. OGMA. Glad you asked. So glad you asked. People ask me all the time, what is it? What is it? Well, there is a character in the god from the Irish and Scottish mythology that is called OGMA, and it's credited with doing some things. He was a warrior and things like that, and it created some language or some way of communicating something. I really didn't know about this character much. What I knew about OGMA and the name of and the word OGMA is that at some point in 2005, it was discovered that there was a star that had a planet around it outside our solar system. And in 2014, the International Astronomical Union launched a sort of a contest to get people to submit names for exoplanets and to be able to name them. And in 2015, they announced that this particular star had gotten the name OGMA, and the star had a planet around it that was named Smertrios. I heard that around that time. That word stuck with me, and when the time came for me to start a company related to astronomy, this is the name. So there is nothing fantastic behind the name. It's just that. It was a name that I heard, and I thought it was cool. I created the logo that somehow resembles a star with a planet around it. Right? In our website, I mentioned that we sell cameras, but one of the things that we're doing is that we're also curating open source and DIY projects. I want to talk about that. Anyone here familiar with open source? Anyone knows what open source is? Mhm. Anyone that is not familiar with open source? I mean, if you're not, I can give you a prime very quickly. Okay. Open source. Generally, software is written in a computer. Software is created, and then you compile that software. The people who create the software, if they're a private company or any company, they create they compile the software. The code of that software is closed. Nobody knows what is outside the company. And then they release the software, you use it, you work with it. If there is any problem, you have to wait for that company to fix it because they are the only ones who know what is inside. So that is closed source. Open source is sort of the opposite. A few people get together on the internet, they talk to each other, they say, let's create this software together. They start programming. I contribute a portion of the code, you contribute the other, someone else debug the software, and then they put it out there so that everybody can use it. That is open source. Everybody can see the code, the source code. Anybody can modify it, and then anybody can use it, right? So it's something that everybody can benefit from, and it's the product of the work of many people, right? That's what open source is. I don't know if you remember, but when Windows launched, was around, I think in the 90s, and Windows became a very big thing at the time. In fact, they made a bunch of people rich. And when they found out around the same time that there was a group of people working on a similar system called Linux, they got very nervous. Linux is open source. It's an operating system similar to Windows. They can do things that are very similar, but it is open source. Anybody can see, everybody can contribute, and it works very well. And the owners of Microsoft and the leaders of Microsoft started to get very nervous about it. In fact, this is what they went on a PR campaign, public relation campaign, and they started saying that this software was a communist thing, and Ballmer said that he likened it to cancer, something like that. So they were very nervous about that, and they fought. They didn't want to include anything in the company that was open source, but the community outside Microsoft was adopting Linux, and because it was so adopted, at some point they couldn't resist it. At some point they say, well, if we can fight it, we have to join it. And in 2016, they started to include inside of Windows a subsystem that let you run Linux inside of Windows. So they say, let's coexist and let's accept this and embrace it. And that was a big deal. Here in our backyard, we have a company that is Red Hat. And Red Hat is just a distribution of Linux, which is open source. All the business of Red Hat is around software that is open and is free, right? The way that Red Hat makes money is by selling services and support to the people who uses the Red Hat version of Linux. And at some point in 2016, IBM purchased Red Hat for $34 billion. So this demonstrates that open source is a big deal. It's not something that is just a work of a few geek and people, DIYs and things like that. It's not just that. It's a big deal. In 2023, it's been calculated that 96% of the servers that are either in enterprise or exposed to the internet, serving websites, they are running on Linux. And approximately 52 million new open source projects are added to GitHub This is a repository of open source projects. 52 million new projects are added every year. So this is a big deal. And I think this is very important. This is very important. I want to mention also that this is not open source versus closed source. They can coexist. They can coexist as an example, as the example that I mentioned here. I want to show you in our field of astronomy and astrophotography, a small example that I have here. This is a telescope from Celestron. We all know Celestron, big company, has been in the market of astronomy equipment for a long time. This back here is a camera that we're evaluating to decide whether we're going to commercialize or not. This is a planetary camera. It uses a sensor that is a sensor from Sony. It's the IMX 290 sensor, right? If any one of you has access to internet, could you search how much does it cost if you're going to buy a camera that uses the IMX 290 sensor? And while you search for that, I'm going to show you something. This right here is an autoguider that we use for astrophotography. And this autoguider is open source. It's 3D printed. And the only things that it has inside that I have purchased is a sensor here in the back with some circuits and a lens in the front. I don't have the tools to make a lens, to carve a lens. So I had to buy one. So I have here a camera and I have here a telescope. Did you find how much does it cost?
Like $200 to $300.
$200 and $300, a camera like this one, right? Using the 290 sensor. Okay, so this camera here has a 290 sensor. Guess how much it cost? Any guess? $30. $30. Okay, so $30 versus 200 and 290 or so, right? So that's the difference. Printing this with a 3D printer, this is the material for printing this is probably less than $1 with a 3D printer. I argue that if you're doing astronomy or astrophotography, probably the best tool that you can have is a 3D printer, because there is a lot that you can do with a 3D printer if you are willing to learn how to use a 3D printer and to tinker with the designs. So that's something for you to consider. Here is an example of how you can use them together with things that are proprietary, that are closed source, and they can work in harmony together. So you have an example here. They can coexist. And I think, as I was saying, that this is very, very powerful. And I want to take you back for a moment. I want to take you back for a moment to the point where I was talking with you at the beginning of science and the time that it took for calculus to be rediscovered. We can make things right now, and we can engage people to make things right now that can solve problems. Problems that in some cases are very important for society. We can think about things like climate change or finding asteroids that are going to hit Earth. I don't know, any problem that you can imagine. Can you think about any problems that are important that we may be able to solve if we have more people working on them? Hunger. How do we make the crops to produce more food? Things like that. I don't know. So I'm trying to convey that we need right now a proportion of 80-20, like when I mentioned the baseball players before, there was a proportion of 80-20. People who have access to instruments like this or like other instruments, scientific instruments in general, to have numbers so that people can come up with discoveries that will solve problems for the common good. And that's what I'm trying to promote and what I'm trying to convey. So with that, I would like to tell you that my point of view is that the field on which we're working, which is the field of astronomy, it needs a similar shift. We're paying for equipment prices that are really, really high. Everybody says this hobby is very expensive, but this is a hobby that is very special. It's not just any hobby. People who do this thing are people who are interested in science, people who are curious, people who can make discoveries. And this doesn't only goes for astronomy, it goes for everything else. Access to scientific equipment shouldn't be that expensive. Scientific equipment should be accessible and available to everybody. And I think that one way that we can make it accessible and available to everybody is by engaging more in open source, by creating projects and supporting projects that are open source. And with that, we will hopefully push the private sector to adopt some of those inventions that we come up with and some of those projects and contribute as a whole to society and to discoveries. So I would like now to talk with you and to exchange with you, see what are the challenges that you see and what is your thinking on this. I would like to open the floor for questions and just to have a conversation, if you mind. What do you think? Any ideas, for instance, on how to improve access to equipment? Any cool DIY project that you know of? What do you think about this?
I'll start it off with do-it-yourself project I've done is I built a barn door tracker when I first started getting into astrophotography as a way to slow myself down because I didn't know what I didn't need, like what I wanted to do. So I 3D printed it, driven by a Raspberry Pi Pico, had a 5-way switch on it that could stop it, speed it up, slow it down. And I used it as recently as January, taking pictures. So that was, put a DSLR on that with an intervalometer. It was a lot of fun. And it's out on GitHub. I've got instructions like from, all the STLs, all the models, and all how I built it, all the problems I had while building it because I messed up stuff. But yeah, I agree. Like those kinds of projects are fascinating. I was just looking through your Make site and like there's some things out there I want to look much deeper into because they look very fun.
Yeah,
challenging maybe.
Yes,
but accessible.
You touched a good point that you were documenting and you were writing and you sharing. You say you share on GitHub?
Yeah, it's all out on GitHub.
Right. One of the biggest problems of open source is documentation. We like to build things, but then we go and we enjoy what we built and we forget to write how to put it together. So even if you don't know how to create a 3D model or something like that, there's room for you on open source. You can write documentation. You can write a translation so that someone else in another country can help improve. And this is the idea, to build on each other's work. And with time, we can get things like this that will cost us $300, $200. We can get them for $30. But it's not just to get it for cheaper. It's to make it more accessible, because now think about the amount of people that could only afford, the people that could afford $300, and now think about the people that can afford 30. You have a pyramid. You have a lot more people that can afford that and more people that can get involved into this. And please don't think only about astronomy. Think also about all fields of science. Think microscopy, spectrometry. We were talking about that before. There is a lot to discover there. There is a lot of science to be done. You were telling me earlier that if you're going to really do good science in spectroscopy, it was going to cost you more than 10,000 or something, you say? Easy, and you probably couldn't do anything serious, right? You say something like
Even if you're limited.
you're limited. Right. Right. Yeah.
Problems I have is I work in a science lab.
Let's get the microphone so that the folks.
Yeah, I think one of the problems I've run into. If you were to look at my resume, I've been working in a science lab
Mhm,
since 2002. So more than 20 years. Okay.
mhm,
One of the side things I did that's science related is this, amateur astronomy. And one of the things that, yeah, of course, you look at your company and how what you're trying to do is make, at least for me, that's important. What your company is doing is you're making astrophotography more accessible,
mhm.
And for me, just photography in general, that's not like typical photography with a camera, taking a picture of wedding photos or landscapes or anything like that. I like all that kind of stuff. So at my job, I don't do astronomy. Okay. I work well, if you were to give me a title for my resume, I'd be a molecular biologist.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So obviously, you just brought up the word. When it comes to picture taking, it's all about microscopy for me.
Microscopy.
Okay. And so what's really nice about what I've done with microscopy is the foundation that where I had to learn microscopy, I guess, is it was pretty much already built. And the reason why that is because the kind of cameras that we used, that I've been using in astrophotography, were also used in microscopy. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I try to get people to understand is that, like you're saying right here, some of the stuff is just so unnecessarily expensive that it's crazy. It's like one time we were buying an epifluorescence microscope for the lab I was currently working in.
How much?
And do what?
How much?
How much was it? It was 50,000.
50,000.
But this was being sold by Carl Zeiss, and I had already become familiar with their optics. And for me, their optics were top notch.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But when they showed me the quote, they showed me the camera, and I was like, wow, that's a lot. So, like you, kind of what you got me to do just now to look on my phone, see how much a 290 sensor. Of course, everybody goes to ZWO. That's the first thing I looked at when you said told us everybody to search on our phones. I did the same thing with this camera. I saw the sensor on it. I was like, huh, okay, that looks familiar.
Mm.
And I didn't even have to look it up on the internet. I was like, oh yeah, I have the next size down of the sensor that's in this camera that they're going to sell us in this microscope for $10,000. Next size down for me for astrophotography was 1,500. So I was like, that's a huge leap.
Mhm.
And I went and looked at the sensor from this company, ATIC. I'm sure you've heard of them, ATIK.
Mhm.
They're not really doing much these days, but anyway, that's another story. But I looked into it, and I told my boss, I looked at this the sensor that's in this camera for this microscope. Yeah, it's next size up from what I already have. It's not worth $10,000. And so what happened is that I told the representative from Zeiss. Of course, I was kind of manipulative about it, cunning, whatever, and they gave it to us for free.
For free.
So yeah. So we saved $10,000 from that. So it's something that, the thing that has been laid out for me as far as learning from as a side effect from doing astrophotography, it's translated into me creating very representative and compelling images in microscopy for my science career. And I think what's important is that people need to realize that this stuff does not have to be harder than it needs to be,
No. At all.
and there's going to be some people that won't be rubbed the wrong way when I say this. Corporations, they try to embellish the fact that their products are the best, and so yeah, that's fine and all. But then again, it was like I've seen other corporations be able to do it for cheaper. Why can't you do this? Why are you doing this to us? Why are you making this more expensive and harder than it has to be for us?
Right.
So, yeah, that's a short story long, but that just goes to what I'm saying is that I think you're trying to get across here is that it makes me say I need to pass this on to other people. I
Yep.
need people to think about
Mhm.
me or talk to people who work in this laboratory environment that I work in, which I enjoy so much. And it's like, take a closer look to what you're doing in this lab. And I'm sure this is something I say on every interview because it's a nice bullet point and it kind of like drives the point home or seals the deal if possible. Is like, if you're going to be successful at anything, you have to innovate and you have to improvise.
Right.
And if you do that,
Right.
it's just like, I like movies a lot too. It's just like an Apollo 13 moment,
Right.
know, and you're able to get yourself out of any problem. So
Could you imagine if one of those microscopes that are used for molecular biology cost as much as a baseball? How many people would be doing molecular biology?
Yeah, exactly. There'll probably be not dozens, excuse me, dozens of thousands of startups if that were the case. Yeah.
Have you heard about the 80-20 rule?
No, I haven't actually.
So there is this, I think it's called the Pareto principle. Pareto principle, right?
Okay.
Will you tell me about it? What is the Pareto principle?
Pareto principle means that 20% of your problems are really the ones that matter.
Uh-huh.
80% are basically noise. They require less priority.
Right. There is this rule of 80-20 applies to a bunch of stuff. And remember the statistic that I showed there, well, in this case, it's not 80-20, it's 80 baseball players versus 2 NASCAR drivers. It's not 80-20, it's more than that. But imagine if a microscope would cost as much as a baseball, there would be millions of people working in molecular biology. How important is molecular biology? How important is molecular biology? What can you do for society with molecular biology?
Okay, well, you brought up the pandemic. I
Uh-huh.
guess we're going a little way out of
Go for it.
astronomy here.
Go
So-
for it. I know you.
Yeah,
How important?
me baking my bread is that there is one individual in here
Uh-huh.
that asked me, and I'm going to barely touch on this because it can be a little inflammatory, about whether or not they should get the vaccine for COVID-19. And the thing that I was the most enthusiastic about that question was not the fact of whether or not they should get it. I could tell them exactly how to make it. And I was just like, if you were to come to me right now, I could show you how to make this vaccine easily. Will it be safe? I don't have no idea. I'd have to submit it to so I'm not Pfizer, so maybe I could get emergency approval in about 20 years compared to Pfizer, but
Right.
still, I mean, this is technology that's been around for a while, has not been used in this kind of context for fighting a pandemic, but it's techniques that I know how to do. I mean, it's really easy. I mean, and it's just, it goes back to what I've always saying. It's just like, you don't have to make this any harder than it has to be.
Right.
Okay.
So if we have 80 times more people working on that,
Yeah.
then there will be a lot more vaccines.
Yeah.
And the next pandemic is not going to happen because we're going to have the tools.
Yeah, and you already have the tools. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, I mean, I even did that with my aunt on the phone. She thought it was the most amazing thing about it. And she bragged about me on Facebook, which I wish I wouldn't have. So, yeah. But anyways.
Any other challenge? Any other work? There is someone over there. Your name is? Lee Joy. Go ahead.
So just slightly different thought on that.
Mhm.
I've been in astrophotography a couple of years. I enjoy taking pictures, being out there with my telescope, but I enjoy just as much being in outreaches.
Yes.
Like say Dick's Park and in my neighborhood
Mhm.
and seeing the excitement among kids and the younger generation. What I find with that is that there is a lot of interest out there, and with your vision of making it more accessible, I think that analogy is like YouTube.
Mhm.
It allowed people to make content. Content creation became much more easier. And sure, there's a lot of junk out there, but there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Everybody has one of this,
Yeah, exactly.
so
So,
they can create for YouTube.
and something like this, what you're talking about, would allow a bigger group, especially the younger generation.
Right.
Young kids, teenagers, to get more involved in it and discover more things. So I think it's a great idea.
Parents, I would like to ask parents, do you think if a good telescope and a good microscope or some other scientific instrument would cost cheaper than a cell phone, do you think your children will use more the cell phone or a telescope or a microscope? They still probably use the cell phone, right? Go ahead, sir.
I have a unique type of extremely elementary photography that I use at events to excite not just the kids, but other adults as well. And it's so elementary, it doesn't even involve a computer. It's called Grand Scenic Astronomy. And then I will print all my photos at 16 by 20 and then set them up at displays and then let people look at them through the binoculars about 36 feet away and see views just like a grand observatory.
That is a good
And I
thing.
can
That's-
also show them
great.
how they can put their smartphones up there and digiscope or take pictures through the lens of the binocular. And the effect, since the circle of the binocular stays inside the edges of each picture. And I've got my own extensive lighting system for it that I could vary the brightness. It could be quite spectacular. And
Excellent.
I have here one of my setup pictures. If
Cool.
you can see it from here. too.
Yeah. I will check it out later
Yeah.
after the,
Yeah, next
Conversation.
person.
thank you. Your name is Rob.
Yeah, Rob. Regarding your question up there, any ideas to help improve access to equipment
Yes.
and associated with astronomy?
Okay.
Our club does quite a bit of this through our telescope loaner program.
Okay.
There's a lot of equipment out there in garages and in closets that in one way or another, they come to us. And so we have a storage unit with, I think we're up to about 24 telescopes. If you had had this program down in Cuba, you could have checked out a telescope for 3
Yes.
months and
Yes.
learn what they can do and not do. So I think that's one example of what how access to equipment can be improved is just through programs like our club
Mm.
has.
Lending programs. That's a
And,
good idea.
And regarding open source, we talk up the Stellarium software,
Mhm,
which is available for your smartphone and it's available for your desktop.
mhm.
And for me, that has just been, and it comes with a scripting language, so you could actually, automate the motion of the stars, and so you could understand, a little more about what's up there. And that's been, that's an open source project, and it's free, and I guess people can get involved with adding modules. It's a modular
Mhm.
thing, so you can add plugins. You can control telescopes with it. There's just a ton of stuff you could do with that open source program.
Yes. In astronomy, we have, in astrophotography, we have a few open source software that we're using. Nina is one that is amazing, that we use it to control sessions of astrophotography. And it's remarkable. It's open source. And you see the contributions, how people add things. There is the indie platform that is used also to do something similar on Linux. So software is taking off for astronomy and astrophotography, but hardware is not, it hasn't catch up. And so there are a few projects like this one that I mentioned here is called the Open Astro something. Go for it.
Baseball. I don't want to use the word infinitely, but it's significantly more complicated than baseball. Right? I mean, I understand what you want, but it's not a reasonable comparison.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that point. I was waiting for that. So let's talk. I understand that point. Carving a mirror for making a lens, carving a lens or carving a mirror for a telescope those are surfaces that have to be very precise. They have to be to a quarter of a wavelength. Exactly, so you don't see a fish. So that takes a lot. But think about it. Think about it. Think about the Blu-ray, a Blu-ray device to play Blu-ray. That came to the market at a very high cost. It's a device that has inside a lot of semiconductor, a lot of circuits. They are to the nanometer. The transistor inside of the circuits are, their size is nanometers. And that takes a lot of technology. It takes a lot of work to build something like that. When decades, exactly. Yes, well, everything is built on top of the shoulders of giants, you know. And when that came to the market, it was very expensive. And then I think 10 years later, you could find them in the Goodwill stores for $5, right? Why is it that the telescope that Galileo worked with, the lenses, why aren't they today? Why didn't they follow the same progression in the price? Why is it that the mirror that Isaac Newton worked with to build his Newtonian telescope didn't follow the same progression price-wise? Demand. But I think it's a cycle, because if you don't have the people, so if they are very, very expensive and people can have access to them, then people don't buy them. So more players, you need more players, you need more companies to get to jump into the wagon and start manufacturing them, and that's when you get the economies of scale and price start to come down. Right. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. So a machine to carve shape a mirror, to figure a mirror, we can do it by hand. We can do it faster if we have a machine. So maybe a good idea would be, if we want to make this more accessible, is for us to start sharing blueprints of how do we do a machine that would help us to carve a mirror or carve a lens faster, to do the deposit of the aluminum coating that it needs to be reflective. So maybe we can contribute to that by getting into projects like that. I get your point. It's different, but at the same, it's not impossible. And if we jump into it, we can make it.
I just want to put in a side note there.
ahead.
There's some individuals who have been in the club for a while, and actually there was a long time ago a program at NC State where you would take a class and they would teach you how to figure a mirror
Yes.
by hand. I mean, of course, they had a few instruments there, but a lot of it was with your own hands.
I'm
And
interested in
just
that.
using simple materials and whatnot. I mean, basically, you're making a sort of like a Dobsonian telescope, or if you just wanted a telescope to put onto a tripod that you already had, or a equatorial mount,
Yes.
whatever. But
Yes.
yeah, that's something that's already been done here in the Triangle area.
Mhm.
The only problem is that back then, because some of the people who may be listening in at over virtual right now or over Zoom right now, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So something like that, I'm just like, this is something you may want to keep going, but I don't know if because there's like things out there that that, like you're saying, they're do it yourself is completely possible. But could you imagine whatever got lost and wasn't really in vogue at the time? How much easier it would be right now? Because it's like if
Mhm.
they were to bring back that program,
Mhm.
yeah, of course, it's going to hinge on how much interest is in it. But I could imagine that one of the individuals who headed up that kind of thing, or headed up the mirror making class, his name was Jim Presley. He's been a member for a very long time.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's probably other materials and machinery that are out there that are just as cheap as comparable materials and machinery back then, and that would just make you could just churn these out just as fast as any other factory in China. Of course, you probably need 10,000 people interested in doing it, but yeah. Anyway, but yeah, I like what you're saying about that. But yeah, that's something our club has done in the past, and so I don't know. I mean, yeah, it'd be a great project. It's just
Mhm.
yeah, and it's something I bring up to a lot of people because we get this question among us all the time. As amateurs out there, they go through or they come to like one of our public events, they look through a telescope and they're like, oh, holy smokes, wow, Saturn. First time I had ever seen it, firsthand with rings around it, other
Mhm.
than just a
Mhm.
speck in the sky, or if they even knew how to find Saturn as a speck in the sky. And so they always ask us, like we're in this discussion, in the spirit of discussion right here, what's a good telescope for me to start out with? And that's something I tell them. It's like a Dobsonian design.
Mhm.
It was created by a guy in the same spirit of what you're talking about,
Mhm.
Juan, who wanted to put astronomy into the hands of just an everyday person.
Right.
You make it as affordable as possible
You did it
and
by
just get
hand.
it out there as quickly as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're willing to put the work into it, I guess that's the hard part is getting people to do it. Um, yeah, this hobby right here could just really take
You
off.
know,
So
you know what is the difference from the main difference that I see from the time when the Dobsonian telescopes were created or became a thing, and now the main difference is that now you can stick a camera, put a phone there, start taking photos, sharing it, and then if then that wasn't widely adopted and widely embraced by people, now you're doing something cool, and maybe more people get to do something that is cool because this is really cool.
That's a good example of
Well-
what I was talking about. It's like, yeah, well, that's kind of like, a little bit downstream from it. You make your telescope right then and there. And then, but if I were to like just take a guess of the around the time when this program was going on over at NC State, I'd say this was about around the 90s. Nobody knew what a smartphone was then.
Right.
Nobody knew
Nobody had
nobody
that.
knew what social media was at
Right.
that time. I mean,
But now-
other than there's just like message boards, that was
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And but anyway, yeah, and that's what I'm getting at. Is like you could take things to the next level and it doesn't have to be that
Exactly.
expensive. And that's something again, going back to what I was trying to drive home, or not trying to drive home, another aspect of my career working as a molecular biologist with microscopy is like, okay, we got this. How can we take it to the next level, and not spend money on other things, but just using what we already have? you
Yeah.
know, and I did that with my boss, actually, a month ago. And I was like, oh, this is great. This could be publishable material, or it's a tool that could be used in further articles that we could publish down the line with the lab that I'm working in now. I work in neuroscience right now in this the environment I'm working
Oh,
as a molecular
okay.
biologist. But anyway, sorry. Go
Very
on.
important.
Go on.
We have, Anna, you wanted to talk? No? We have Carrie here want to talk?
I'm curious about something Steve said at the beginning of our talk, before
Okay.
the talk began, actually, about being able to do serious science
Serious science.
with instruments. And so as a layperson, I'm curious, Steve is interested in spectroscopy, is
Spectroscopy.
that right?
Mm-hmm.
So could you imagine, based on your point of view,
Mm-hmm.
could you imagine being able to do serious science with DIY 3D printed tools, like in that kind of a space, like you're doing in astrophotography?
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine? I'm just thinking one objection that folks might have to this idea about shifting to an open ecosystem for these tools is, could we really do serious science with
Right.
making something for $30 versus spending 10,000?
Right.
How serious, or how much is the serious related to the dollar? Is it or not? Does that make sense?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in spectroscopy, so I can't give you specific details to that, but I can tell you that I'm sure that right now DIY and open source is being used in spectroscopy, because what we mentioned before, that 90% of the servers that are being used right now are running Linux. And Linux is open source, it's free, it's DIY, right? So that's one component that you have there, software that is open source. I don't know if in spectroscopy you have other software that can be used in addition to the operating system, Linux, other software that can be used for that. I would assume that there may be, I don't know. But what I see the biggest challenges on all of this in astronomy and probably in spectroscopy is in the hardware. Hardware is lagging on open source and DIY. It's always the thing that is holding us back, because it's the hardest. But it doesn't have to be. If we get involved, and if we push and more people push for it, at some point we will be able to do serious science in anything we want, any field that we want. It is. I remember when I started to get involved with Linux, every year I tried to install it in my computer when I was on vacation. And I tried for 6 times. So it took me 6 years before I was able to say, okay, I'm going to leave it on my computer and I'm going to use it. Because for the first 6 years, I couldn't use it. And nowadays, I don't take it off my computer, right? It's really good. And people are doing serious science with it, and serious everything. Governments are working on it, are running on it, everything. Go ahead.
I think in answer to
Your
that
name, please?
question,
Your name is?
I'm sorry,
Your name?
I'm Ann.
Ann.
Hi.
Thank you. I couldn't see it.
Anyway, in answer to that question, I think that you can do serious science. It depends on what sort of science you wanted to do. I mean,
Okay.
depending on, obviously, if you have a smaller telescope, you're going to have to, maybe limit yourself to the solar system. You could do that, or limit yourself to the sun. Obviously you'll need a filter, but big deal, filter, but you could limit yourself to the sun, and you could limit yourself to the planets themselves. So I think that, and then of course, as depending on your dollars as they grow more, obviously you would spend a little bit more to get into the deep sky objects. I mean, can't do the deep sky object so much with like a 3-inch, a 3-inch diameter telescope, so
Mhm.
that's what
Anna there.
While I walk over, there is a lot of citizen science stuff was that what you were going to bring up? Okay, so Anna's familiar with this as well, but a lot of citizen science projects out there where you can contribute data from amateur astronomy or astrophotography.
Okay.
I don't think they're very well known, and I'm personally not participating in any of them, but they're looking at large scale projects over large periods of time with large data sets that involve, you need data across the entire globe over a short period of time for some projects. I think there's a lot of different ways that we can contribute.
And just to add to that, I just wanted to say, like, I think that really comes down to what is the definition of serious science, right? And I think that doesn't come down to the equipment that you have. I think that's really kind of what happens in your mind, right? I mean, I think that what is it, Eratosthenes, who measured the circumference of the earth with what, 2 sticks, right?
Right.
And a walk. And that's basically it, right? Yeah, there are barriers based on the equipment you have access to. And I think that's why what Juan is doing is so cool. Because everybody has the ability to do quote unquote serious science, as long as they have access and awareness. A lot of underserved areas, which is, where I work, where I teach STEM on-site field trips. These kids have never looked through a microscope or a telescope before. Some of them haven't even, seen one, at all before or ever been to a museum. And so it's really that boils down to access, right? And so that's one of the reasons I think what Juan is doing is just really cool. I just wanted to say that. And yeah, citizen science was something I was going to mention as well. Not just contributing to data sets, but also working through existing data sets. So a really big one, a big platform out there is Zooniverse. They have tons of projects on there where you can go through data that other people have submitted and you can help identify things. It's for astronomy projects and science across the board. They have all kinds of cool projects in different areas. And you can read up on the material that they have for you. The documentation is, pretty good. It depends based on the project and who's, the primary investigators and stuff, obviously, but a lot of them are really well documented and will lead you through the process of what they need you to do. Because like I said, everyone has the ability to do quote unquote serious science. It's a matter of just access to the data or equipment or what have you for that science.
Thank you so much. Again, this has been really interesting.
Thank you.
I am a newbie. I don't have equipment. I still use binoculars. Like to keep it simple, use my own eyes. But I'm curious, can you walk me through the actual details of what this is? I'm hearing there's open source, which is
Sorry, the details of what?
of what exactly you're offering. There's open source.
Right.
Is there products that people rent? Is it that something that they buy from you? What's the actual product that you're offering? Is it code?
Good question. Good question. Yes. So,
And for instance, if I don't have a 3D printer, is that another level of I don't have access to be able to produce this?
right. So good question. Let me see if I can answer that. The
And then I have a
products that I
third.
offer
ahead.
already built are mainly cameras, and they're expensive. They're not, so they're really expensive. And those are the products that I sell. I sell some accessories for those cameras as well, like filters and tilt adjusters and things like that. I sell those products to make a profit to finance other projects that I want to build that are open source, right? And to promote open source. One of the things that I'm doing is that I'm curating and I'm aggregating projects that I find that are interesting, that are dispersed, and bringing them together. So that you, if you want to do something, if you want to build something, you can come, you have the information there, and you know where to go. You have a collection of things there. And I want to continue increasing that collection, so that collection of open source projects with documentations and photos and things like that. So no, I don't sell open source. But I aggregate the information, which is something that is hard to find when you want to do something by yourself.
Visually, what those products look like.
And is it possible that you would be a good person to have at like an open source at one of our, what do we call them, outreach events, where you have a 3D printer and you're printing things and you're
Yes.
creating these objects? Would that be an appropriate
Yep.
use to amplify your message?
We can do that. We can do that. And anyone here, I mean, someone mentioned having a 3D printer here before. And so we can, I think we can do that. We can demonstrate it. I mean, you ask also if you are limited by not having a 3D printer. That is another thing that is it will put you at the lack of access. Well, the thing is that with 3D printing, if you find the models, if you find the files for 3D printing something, you can send the files to people whose business are 3D printing those files for you. And it's really affordable. It's really affordable. The material, when I'm going to print this, the material, when I'm going to print the parts of this little device, the software tells me how much it's going to cost me the plastic that I'm using. And it's usually 5 cents, 15 cents, things like that. That's the cost. So I think this is probably like 60 cents that I spend in plastic here. A roll of 1 kilogram of plastic, which is 2.2 pounds of plastic, will cost you $15. And you can do a lot of stuff with that. And if you send a file to someone to 3D print it for you, I haven't checked lately because I have my own 3D printer. But if you send a file to someone, I'm sure you're gonna get back the product, and it's not gonna cost you a lot. So, and 3D printers are not too expensive. If you're willing to learn how to use them, they are getting more affordable. They are following that same rule that we were talking about, that same trajectory of price. That they were very expensive at the beginning, but they are coming down. And this is also another funny thing is that there are open source projects out there that give you the files and the blueprints for you to build your own 3D printer. You can 3D print your own 3D printer. Yeah. So if I remember, I got it during Black Friday, and I think it was usually $300, and I got it for like $200 or something like that. And it's really good. It's really good. I mean,
Right. Well, Juan, I think we're going to stop there.
yes.
Wonderful conversation, great
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you for the information, and thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
contributing.